Hello and welcome to this video tutorial from BlenderCookie.com. My name is Jonathan Williamson, and today I'm going to take you through the process of retopologizing a high poly sculpted model. In this case, we're going to be retopologizing this creature head that I have, and this is something that I just sculpted from scratch the other day. If we go in and look at the base mesh on this, you can see I have my multi-resolution set to level 7, which at level 7 I have just over 3 million polygons. If I take this down to level 1, you can see that I started with just a very simple base mesh, or actually level 0, a very simple base mesh that just basically gives me the structure of a human head in this case, that I then modified as I went up to form the spine along the top of the head, and then of course to form the beak. And this was something that was just created from scratch. I went in, sculpted most of the details or all of the major details by hand using the new sculpting tools in 2.53, and then used a series of alpha maps to get all of the fine detail in here. So with a model this high resolution, it's obviously not very practical to try and use this in any kind of real-time environment or even in a rendering environment, because there's simply too much topology to work with. If you were to try animating this, it would be absolutely nonsensical. And so this is where retopology comes in, where we actually go in and use this structure that we've created to generate or to create by hand a much simpler base mesh that replicates the same form, but with very clean topology that we can easily animate or render or do anything else that we want to. So the method that I'm going to use to retopologize this is actually doing it by hand by using vertex snapping to the face. But some of you may be asking, well, why don't you use the excellent Surface Sketch add-on? And in fact, this was my original goal, was to use the Surface Sketch add-on, which if I just go ahead and sculpt down a notch or two, let me just demo real quick what the Surface Sketch does so that you can see it. It uses the grease pencil combined with a empty mesh basically. So if I hit Shift A, add a mesh, and then just hit Tab to go into edit mode and delete all those vertices, I can find it in the toolbar here underneath Surface Sketching. And if I just hold down D and then left click and drag to draw in some grease pencil lines, which initially are just set at the cursor, so let me remove those and we'll tell it to set at the surface. If I draw those in and then click Add Surface, it will generate the topology along those lines. Well, this is very cool. The problem is that when working on a complex mesh like this, you tend to get some very odd behavior. So for example, I can draw in a couple of lines like this, add the surface, and I've set it to one edge ring for the perpendicular and one edge ring for the parallel. So I've got one edge ring and one edge ring. And initially the behavior is supposed to work such if I add in or select this loop here and then draw in another line and click Add Surface, it will connect those. You can immediately see that we have some very odd behavior going on where this one is projected up here, then the bottom one is in the correct place. If I draw in two lines, again, we get odd behavior. So this is exactly why I'm not using the Surface Sketch in this case. It's simply because we get some very odd behavior. I have contacted the developer of this and I have not heard back yet, but I hope to, and hopefully are able to push the development of the Surface Sketch a little bit further, because it really is an incredible retopology tool that has a lot of very good potential, but unfortunately, unfortunately right now it doesn't quite work, at least for this case. But luckily for us, we have another method that we can use, which is essentially the same way that it works in 2.49, only it's been moved around a little bit. In 2.49, we had dedicated retopology tools. Well, the retopology tools now have been merged with the snapping tools down here that allow us to actually snap it to the surface. So let's just use this real quick, and we're just going to add in another mesh. We'll just use mesh plane. And while we're at it, let's just go ahead and name this, and we'll just call this creature_low. We can also delete this other object here that was created through the Surface Sketch, and then we have the eyes here, which we'll go ahead and name as creature_eyes. So with the low mesh, they tab to go into edit mode, and we want to hit X and delete all the vertices. Then what we're going to do is enable the snapping down here, which you can actually see I've already done, but if you have it off, simply click the snap icon, and then you want to change the snap element to the face and then enable the surface form right here. So project vertices on the surface of other objects. When we do this, if we go ahead and say hit Control left click to place a new vertex, first off, you'll notice it's been placed at the cursor. So it's placed basically at the origin point. But if we hit G and then left click, it'll immediately be projected onto the surface. And we can now go ahead and simply just hit E to extrude and begin extruding individual elements of the mesh to create our topology, following the forms we have, and it automatically just projects onto the surface. So I can just extrude these all the way around, following all the main surface functions. So I'm following all the masses here, and I'll just extrude this around, come down to about there. And I can be, pretty lenient on it, and it's just projected beautifully right on the surface there. Then I can go ahead and select everything, hit E to extrude, scale it in, and you'll notice that immediately Blender slows down a lot when you start to scale it in. And this is because it's projecting each one of these vertices in real time onto the surface, or not really real time, but on the fly onto the surface. And so it's having to calculate a lot more. But we can just manipulate all these as we want, basically free form, and it will automatically be projected onto the surface right around it. You can see as I move down to the eyes, they're projected onto there. And so this is a very, very cool tool that works really well, actually. And, unfortunately, it's not as fast as Surface Sketch when it's working ideally. You're not able to create large amounts of topology very, very quickly, but you can begin to see just how well this will work. And so what I'm going to do is, first off, let's go ahead and add in a mirror modifier on this. Add in mirror, and we'll enable clipping. Then let's go ahead also and enable it during edit mode so that we can see all the vertices, so it helps give a feeling of a complete mesh. I'll also go ahead and save my file. And then just to speed this up a little bit, we don't need to see all the fine details in here. So let's go ahead and take this down to level 4, which still has all of our primary surface form. We've got all the different detail in here, or the main functions, without having to worry about all the little surface detail. That's just going to bog down the memory. So with this, I can go ahead, maybe I'll slide this one along. And the goal here is just to create very, very clean topology. So maybe I'll start here, then at the bridge of the nose, I'll go ahead and extrude this out. And you can see I'm going to let my topology just kind of follow the surface detail. So I've got this wrinkle going through here, this wrinkle in here, and so I'm just going to kind of follow that form with my topology, maybe going out to about there so I don't get too wide. And I'll just take that out to the center, snaps right in. I can then grab these ones here, and I'll just extrude them right down to the beak. Take this one down a little bit more, and here. And then I might go ahead and add in another edge loop right there by hitting Control R. And you'll notice that when I do that, it doesn't snap to the surface. So all you need to do is just rotate to a nice viewing angle right about there, hit G, and then left click, and it automatically raise up to the surface. And so really, as you get going, this is actually a very quick process once you kind of get into the flow of things. So, I can just go ahead and start extruding out bits and pieces here. Maybe I'll skip over a few edge loops where, I don't know exactly how many I'm going to need, so I'll wait until I get further along to attach those before I add in those extra edge loops. I'll go ahead and take this one down around the beak, so I get this nice flowing topology around the beak, which will really help define a lot of my mesh. And so the topology on this, obviously we're not creating a human character, but we still follow the same topology rules that we do if we were creating a human head, in that we have the loops around the mouth, around the eyes, around the jawline, and other loops like that that we want to be sure to follow throughout the entire mesh so as to keep a nice, clean topology. That's really the key of retopology, is to create the good, clean topology so that you can do other things with it. I can go ahead and select these, and I'll hit F to fill in that face. I can see that I'm going to need another loop in here, so I'll just go ahead and hit Control R, left click, and then hit G and left click again to snap those together. Go ahead and create that face there and here. And then I can see I'm going to need one more loop. And so looking at this, I can say that maybe it'll work best right in here. So then I'll just slide this one down by hitting Control E, edge slide. Then I can fill this, and then Alt right click to select that and fill that right in. And just like that, I've created that area right in there. Maybe I'll go ahead and select these, bring them back up to the surface. This is where I did a loop cut, and I didn't bring them up. So that, you will find that there are a few tools that do not snap automatically to the surface. You can see already this is beginning to take shape, but those tools can easily be compensated for simply by doing basically just G or any other transform and just letting it snap itself to the surface. So on this, I'll go ahead. One of the easy ways to do this so that you kind of fill in things quickly and get a good idea of where things are going is to do a lot of the major loops first, just like we did on the male head series, and if you're a citizen member, then on the female head series, where we lay out all the topology structures first and then just fill in the gaps. So we'll do the same thing here. Let's go ahead and maybe start with the brow. So I'll go ahead and just take this up, and I'm just going to take it up twice. First, right to the edge, right there, or to the basically to the peak of this ridge, and then I'll select this edge. And what I'm going to do is just extrude this back around the form. So, obviously this is not something that you're going to normally see in a normal human model or anything like that. And so we want to make our topology follow that. So I'll just extrude it out and then just continue extruding back. I'm going to ignore things like these wrinkles in here for the topology because that will all be done through a normal map. I'll just keep extruding these back, bringing them right to the edge. And that is something that we will do in this tutorial as well, is once we finish retopologizing everything, we will UV unwrap the low poly mesh and then bake out the normal map to it. And so there I've just extruded that all the way back around. And then I can go ahead and start extruding this down right here. Take that to about right there. Add in another edge loop, which I'll then hit G, left click to bring it to the surface, and then just fill those in. And I can go ahead and fill this in and see that I need another edge loop, so I'll just grab that, fill that, and just fill in these areas very easily. And on this, actually, I'm not a big fan of this topology. Well, it's not too bad. Okay, I'll go ahead and leave it like it is. We'll go ahead and grab all three of these edges here, extrude them back, and we'll just take it right to there. And then maybe we'll go ahead and bring this one up to right about there, there, there. We'll add in another edge loop, hit G, left click, then fill in these spaces. Then we can go ahead and take this one and we'll bring it out around the ridge that we've created here for the ear. And I'll just bring this down, extrude it a few times, following the form of the ear. And so we're not necessarily creating a low poly mesh, we are creating a lower resolution version of the mesh that will keep all of the form very well, but allow us to bake out all the high poly details to it from the high resolution mesh. And so, some of you may be thinking, well, this isn't really low poly by normal standards, because it's not. And that's not what we're going for. Instead, what we're going for is a much lower resolution, more optimized version of our mesh than obviously what we have here, that then we can use for rendering purposes and such. And we want to create one such that even if we just apply a normal map to it, baked out from the high resolution details, it should pass inspection and pull in nearly all of the same amount of detail as we would see on the full resolution one, without having to add in that extra physical detail. We should let it be just through the normal map and barely be able to tell, except in a few cases, with the normal map applied when rendering. Okay, so I'll keep just kind of filling in some of these areas. I'll bring this one down. And remember that control left click for extruding, which unfortunately is a very quick method of extruding, does not work with a surface snapping either. So if you want to use that, just remember to do any kind of transform immediately afterwards to bring it back up. I'm going to select these by alt right clicking on them and then hitting B and middle click and dragging to deselect this area. And then I'm simply going to hit E to extrude and take this back to right about there and then bring it back following the contours of my form. So I've got this form right in here to then just follow that in. And one of the main things in terms of following the form is that's what's going to help you hide all the form differences between the high resolution and the low resolution. So the closer you can follow the main muscle flows and structure, the more accurate it'll look with the normal map without having to add in the extra detail. I'm going to take this one right out to the beak right about here. And then I'm just going to hit Control R, add in 2 loop cuts, and then hit G and left click and just immediately bring those up to the surface. Then I'm going to go ahead and extrude this out right through here. Just bring it right around and then connect it right there. Now, in the case of this model, I'm going to go ahead and keep the beak as one solid piece, such that if you were to animate the beak, you would actually need to do some modification. So be aware that, if you're doing this on your model and want to animate it, I'm not going to be animating this, and so I'm not worried about it. So I'm just going to close the beak off. But if you're going to animate your model, you need to be sure that you create the interior, or else just make it such that the bottom beak can lower from the top. I'm not too worried about that on this one because I'm not going to be animating it, and so I'm going to take a shortcut as far as the modeling goes and just fill it right in. Connect all these areas. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'll just select this one here and this one here, and then these two. Hit F to fill that face, and using the same amount as below, I'll just fill in 2 edge loops. Left click or G left click, bring it right to the surface. Extrude these over like this. And before going any further, I'll go ahead and fill in these holes so I can kind of see where things are going. Go ahead and bring it out one more time. Scale it down a bit. Connect all these. Then I can connect this here. Connect this here. And then I can see that I've got 1 extra loop in there. And so what I'll do is let's just go ahead and let's just add in 1 more loop right here, which we'll just bring up. We'll take this, we'll Control E to edge slide it, G and left click to bring it back to the surface, and then we'll just fill in that face. Then we'll go ahead and let's see what we want to do to connect these up here. So first I'll bring these 2 up, and I can see I need to fill in a loop right there. Same thing here. And so what I'll do is actually I'll go ahead and remove this loop. Well, no, actually let's not do anything yet. Let's first just fill all these in, and then we'll worry about filling those other areas. Need to bring a vertex out right there. Fill these, fill that. Then I'm going to go ahead and merge these 2 vertices. So I'll W, merge at center. Oh, no, actually I don't want to do that. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this edge loop right here. So I'm going to hit X, delete the edge loop. Then I can just slide this one along right there, hit G, left click, and then fill in that triangle, and then select this triangle as well, hit F, which will merge those into a single face. And then I'll go ahead and just even out this topology a little bit by sliding this along. Then I'll slide this one along a little as well. Notice I'm deselecting the top portion by hitting B and then middle click and dragging. So let's take a look at what we have so far. You can see what we've got. It's working out really well. Obviously you can see, what you first notice is that it looks like the same model. And this is really the key point, and where topology is very cool is we don't have to think about the form we're creating. We can basically just trace it as long as we're focusing on topology. And so this is also a very good topology exercise, because one of the things that can be very challenging, particularly for new users, is you want your model to look good. But if you don't have the topological experience to know how to create those areas with good topology, it can be very frustrating. And so I think that's one reason that a lot of newer users in particular end up with bad topology, is not only because they don't know how to create the topology needed and how it should be formed, but they also don't know how to create the topology in such a way as to still create the form that they want. And so they're more focused on the form rather than the topology. But when doing retopo like this, it allows you to focus just on the topology and not on the form. Whoops. Sorry about that. My calendar popped up with a quick notification. But so I'm just going to keep going on here. And in this area, what I'm going to do is extrude out a form right here. So I'm going to first go ahead and just disable clipping. Then I'll select these 2 areas. I'll hit E to extrude and just take it back like this. And then I'm going to grab this vertex, take it up, and I'm going to actually re-enable clipping. So I'll just take it up to right about there. And then I want to I want to fill in this with a quad, or actually it's going to be a triangle, but if you were to merge this with the mirror modifier, then it would immediately become a quad, and so you can go ahead and work with it just like that. Or we can go ahead and make sure that we have a quad on both sides. We'll just hit W and subdivide on this edge, giving us a full quad with which we can work with. So we'll just select them both and hit F to fill that face. And this is actually good because it gives us extra topology. So now what I'm going to do is just extrude this out, say to right about here. And since this is locked to the center, all I need to do is just extrude this out at nice even distribution. So I'll maybe take that to there and there. And so I'm not able to move it away from the center, so that makes it very, very easy and very quick. On the spines here, it's going to get, I'm actually going to not do the spines just yet. We'll make it a little bit easier by waiting until we get to the next stage. I'm going to turn off snapping for just a moment, or actually what you can do instead is hit G and then Control, move it back, and then snap it back to the surface right there. Extrude this back to there. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off snapping by hitting Shift Tab, and then on these I'm just going to grab these, Shift D, move them over to right about here. I'll go ahead and subdivide this one, move it over. Same thing here. Just getting them approximate. Then I'll do that again here. And then once more. And you'll see what I'm going to do in here in just a moment. So I'm just creating all the spines, or basically the outline of all the spines. And remember that I don't have snapping on at the moment, just because when working with single vertices along the ridge line, it can just get a little finicky at times. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn snapping back on. I'm going to go ahead and select all of these pieces, just about like this, and then I'm not going to select this one yet. I'm going to turn clipping off, and then I'm going to hit E to extrude, right click, hit period to scale towards the cursor, and then just scale them in about like that. And so now they've scaled pretty much right in, and just about, since my cursor is right at the center, I've got these pretty much coming right out from the center points. It's basically just trace that right in. So I'll scale it down one more time. Go ahead and deselect some of these vertices as they come into place. And so here, just very quickly, I've gone in and created those spines very, very easily. You know, I'm just now going to do a little bit of tweaking here to reposition a few of these, but just saved me a lot of time by doing that all in advance to very quickly do that. So now just modifying each one of these, bringing them around to fit the ridge topology right in there. Same thing here. I'll bring this one up and this one up. Almost done there. Okay, and then what I can do is I'll just go ahead and fill in these faces here. So I'll first select the top one, then Alt right click to select the bottom one, each time just hitting F. And so I can take some of the steps out of there. So first I manually select the top, hit F, then Alt right click, select the bottom, hit F. And so then what I'm going to do is once I have all these done, is then I will just go through, add in an edge loop to each one, which will then allow me to just bring the spines right out. So I'll add in the edge loop, left click, hit G, left click, bring it right to the surface. So then I'll just repeat this process. So it's Control R, left click, right click to put it right in the center, G to bring it to the surface, left click. Simple as that. Oops. There we go. So now I've brought all those up. And so now what I will do is to form the spine tips. I'm going to go ahead and turn off snapping, so I'll hit Shift Tab, I'll enable clipping again, and then I'm just going to select a tip at a time, and we're just going to extrude these up and merge at center. And we'll bring that over there. And on spine tips and things like that, these are one of the few areas where it's okay to use triangles because they're not something that's going to deform really. Whoops. And they're not something that really determine your topology or anything like that. They're not main structures. They're just little horns and protrusions. And technically you can see that if we were to then just bring these down, we would still have a single quad. And we'll just bring these right to the center. Okay, so turning snapping back on, we'll go ahead and finish this off. So on this one here, I can see it's sticking out. I'll just bring that out there. On the side, bring it out about there. And then what I'm going to do is I want to merge the base of each spine into a single quad because we don't want nearly this much topology going through the entire head. And so what I'll do is I'm just going to extrude out a single vertex here, and then I'll just fill in a quad. So I'll do that on each one of these, and that will just lower the topology sufficiently. Bring that way up in there, bring this out. And I'm not going to take too much longer on this. I'll go ahead and bring this loop out a bit. There's one thing that you'll find on topology is that certain areas will be a little bit tedious, but it's really not too bad, and certainly it's much, much faster than if you were to recreate everything by hand the entire time. Bring that out there. We'll go ahead and extrude this down. I just switch back to rotating around the bounding box centers by hitting comma on my keyboard. Okay, here we go. Now let's go ahead and start connecting. Oh, we still need to do this area right up here, so we'll just do this very, very quickly. Just going to delete this edge and then bring this down right here. And we'll bring these over. Add in an edge loop right there. And we're almost done here. Connect that. And so once again, let's go ahead and take a look at our mesh with what we've got. So in object mode, I just select and hit Shift H, and you can really see it coming together very, very well. Although we've got some that were shaded smooth for a second there. That's weird. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is we're pretty much there. I've shown pretty much all we need to do for the Retopo. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording at this moment. Go ahead and jump ahead and finish out the topology. We just have a couple extra loops. We'll put one right in here, put one right through here, down the neck, And so I'll just do those real quickly, fill it in, and then resume and show you what I did, and then we'll jump on to the next step, which is baking the normal maps. Okay, so after about another 10-15 minutes or so of retopoing, I've come up with the final mesh, and you can see here, if I go ahead and just hide the other model, take a look at it, you can see I went in, just filled in the neck area, which is plain topology, flows right through around the back, then over the edge, around here through the neck muscles, filled in rest of the neck, also the inside of the ear, and then the top of the head here, which used some topology tricks such as a lot of diamonds here to convert the 3 edge loops or the 2 edge rings to 1. And so just filled it all in pretty cleanly. You'll notice that in most places I've got pretty even, nice clean topology. Maybe I could go ahead and slide this down a little bit. Maybe slide this one through a bit. But for the most part, most of the topology is pretty nice and clean. It's pretty even. And so we are ready to move on to the next step, which I initially said was the normal map baking, but in fact we actually need to go ahead and UV unwrap this. So before we do anything though, let's first go ahead and turn off the surface snapping and then just turn the snapping back to increment so as to not mess anything up. Next, let's go ahead and unhide everything, and then actually no, we want to hide this. One other thing that I did want to point out is you notice that I didn't do the eyes, and this is because we would use an actual eye mesh like we already have set up to do the eyes on this. Since we're not working with an ultra low resolution model, such as for a game or something, then we'd go ahead and keep it just like it is. Oops, I meant to turn snapping off there. And so we will go ahead and use an actual eye model if we were to render this. So what I want to do is to UV unwrap this, and the way that we'll do it is we need to set up some seams. And so we want to unwrap this much the same way that we would do a human head. And so firstly, let's go ahead and select maybe this vertex here, and then go all the way down to the edge of the spine right here, and we'll go ahead and hit W, and actually let's go to right here, and we'll hit W and select vertex path, but hit F6 and change it from, I don't actually know why that didn't show up. Let me undo that. So we'll hit W, select vertex path, hit F6, and actually my operator panel is not showing up, and the reason being actually is because I forgot and I changed my F6 keystroke to be a screen capture for Jing, which is another application from TechSmith. And so instead, we'll just select this, and then this, and then I believe we can actually bring up the operator panel through here, or maybe not. So that's okay. We'll just select this from the side by Alt-right click, and then deselect what we don't want by just middle click and dragging with the box select, and then we'll hit Control-E and mark seam. Okay, and let's just go ahead and split our view, and we'll turn one of these to the UV image editor. My apologies there for the phone going off. But getting back to where we were, so with the first seam set up and our UV image editor set up, let's go ahead and first leave edit mode and then click apply on our mirror modifier to get a solid mesh. And then within this, first I'll save my file, let's go ahead and select everything and hit U and unwrap just to see what we get. And immediately you'll notice that we have an absolute disaster. Well, we need to go ahead and do a bit more unwrapping. So one thing that you'll notice is that this is an interesting thing that you tend to see every now and then, where we're only seeing basically the half of each face. So let's hit everything, Control-N, let's also hit W and remove doubles just in case, and we'll hit U and unwrap again. And now you can see with the normals flipped, it looks just fine. So before we go any further, let's go ahead and hit N and bring up our the display category here. And underneath shading, let's just enable texture solid, and we'll click new on here and turn on a UV test grid. This will just allow us to see any distortion that we have on the map. And actually you can see that immediately it actually looks pretty darn good. We don't see a lot of seams we don't see a lot of stretching. You'll notice there's some slight distortion from the beak to the back where things kind of shrink. So we can try a couple of things to work out the seams. So let's maybe set a seam right through here just to try it. So we'll select these, Control-E, and mark the seam, select everything, U, and unwrap. And we can see that improved it a little bit. Looking at the map here, that actually looks pretty good. Something else we can do is let's try real quick putting a seam right along the top of the head here. This tends to help even things out. So again, we'll mark that seam, select everything, U, and unwrap. And again, that evens it out even a little bit more. And in fact, I'm pretty happy just leaving it right where it is. You know, we're not seeing actually next to no distortion along any of the tiles. Everything's nice and square. And so that actually unwrapped exceptionally well. So with that, actually one thing I'm going to do to make this easier to texture, let's remove this seam here and then set a seam along these edges here. So we'll Control E and mark that seam. And so now we'll hit U and unwrap. And that'll just make that a little easier to texture. And you can see that these are overlapping just a little bit. And so what we'll do is we'll just scale them apart about like that, which will just barely affect the texture, but that way they're not overlapping within the UVs. So now let's go ahead and we're going to remove this image. Let's just remove it. And then let's rotate this around 90 degrees. We'll hit R and then type in -90 so that it's straight and horizontal. And then since we've got a nice long horizontal mesh on this, let's add in a new image. And on this image, let's go ahead and make it, let's do 2048 by, that would be 360. So 360 or 3060. That way it's basically a 3-1. Oops, and actually I did that the wrong way. So let's do that again. And instead we're going to do, there's Wes, 3060 by 2048. This will give us a nice high resolution map, which now we just need to hit U and unwrap again to remove the distortion we were getting there, rotate it again, and we can select everything and just hit Control A and Control P, which will pack that right into the image there. We'll go ahead and scale these away from each other, and we are pretty much ready to bake. Let's go ahead and name this as creature_normal map. We'll save our file, and then we're going to go ahead and bake it. To bake it, what we want to do is first leave edit mode, then hit, let's go ahead and turn off the texture solid. We'll hit Alt-H to show the other high resolution mesh. Let's take that high res and turn the preview all the way up so we get all of the detail in there. And then we want to first select the high res and then shift select the low res, so we can actually do it in the outliner, make it easier since this is so cluttered. And we'll just shift select creature low. That'll have both of them selected, as you can see here. And then underneath the render options, we want to go down to the baking tab right here, which I'll just go ahead and move it up so that we can see it a bit easier. And if that tooltip will get out of our way here. There we go. You'll notice that things are pretty slow when we move it up to high res there. And it's actually much slower than it normally would be, but since I'm recording, my computer's under a lot more stress. And so what we want to do is change this over to a normals bake, and we're going to go ahead and select the selected to active. And actually, while we're testing this, just make sure it's right, I'm going to go ahead and turn this down just a couple notches, which means we'll still be able to see it very easily. We'll still be able to see it just fine, but it just won't have all the high detail in there. Then once we ensure that the settings are right, then I'll go ahead and go back up to the full settings and bake it out again. So with the normal mode set to bake, normal space set to tangent, let's just click bake and cross your fingers and hope it'll work. One thing I will say is that the baking is still pretty buggy in 2.53, so you can definitely expect some crashes and or odd behavior, but we'll cross our fingers and hope it works. Now you can see that the bake is finished. I did pause it while I was doing that because it did take, you can see somewhere around, well, it took about 5 minutes or so to bake it at that resolution. And you'll notice a couple of things. First off is we've got all this wonderful detail that baked in nicely, but you'll notice that also all of the faces on the low resolution are showing through. So what you need to do is select the low res, hit tab to go into edit mode, which it already is, select everything and hit W and shade smooth. And this way, when we bake it again, those edges should be gone. So again, I'm going to press bake and I'll pause the recording once more while this is going. And now that it's done, you can see that we've got a very nice, smooth, normal map. Something that you also notice is that it did pull in all the high-res detail, and so it actually pulled in at the highest level, which is something that I didn't realize. So we could actually go ahead and select this one, take it on down to a lower resolution, run even faster. if we wanted to. Something to note is one thing you have to be sure of is that each of the objects that you're baking are on the same layer, so as to they see each other. Let's go ahead and save out our files. We'll just save this as, and we'll just go ahead and call it normal map or creature underscore normal map. And we'll save it as a PNG, which we can scroll down here, make sure it is, and save as. And then what we want to do is let's go ahead and set it up so that we can see it in the viewport here. And as soon as this saves out, what we'll do is let's just go ahead and merge these two views. We don't need to see this anymore. So we'll just slide that back over there. Let's go ahead, set up a material on this, add a new material. We'll just call this creature head. Oh, and I crashed there just for a moment. As with 2.53, you're going to find a fair bit of crashing, but that's all right. So we'll just go back over, add in our new material. We'll go ahead and name this as creature head. We don't need to worry about the diffuse just yet. Let's go and add a texture, add a new image texture, and then we'll just go ahead and set this as the normal map, which we've already loaded in right here. We want to just turn on the normal map option, set it to the tangent space, go down under the influence, turn off the diffuse, and then turn on the normal for under the geometry. And then let's just go ahead and maximize our viewport here. Hit in to bring with the properties panel. Shading is GLSL. So we can just hit Alt-Z and we should immediately be able to see it, which we can, but the thing is that we don't have any lamps in our scene yet. So let's hit Shift-A, add in a new lamp, and we'll just choose a, let's do an area lamp. On this area lamp, let's just position it right up here. Go back to Alt-Z. And this may only work with point lamps actually. So we'll add in, there we go. Yeah, it only works with point lamps, but that's all right. And you'll notice that something is wrong with our normal map. And what it is we forgot to set it to map along the UVs. And so here, we'll just toggle some of these out underneath the mapping. We want to set this to UV. I'm going to go ahead and merge these two windows so we can just leave this open. And now you can start to see exactly what is happening. So this is getting very, very cool. Let's go ahead and we'll turn this energy up. Say it about right there. Then let's go ahead and fill in two more as fill lamps. We'll turn off the specularity on them though. Then I'll hit Alt-D to duplicate it to create a linked copy so that we can replicate the settings on it. So now both these two lamps that I have selected are referencing the same lamp settings, as you can see indicated by the number of users here. And so here we go. Now we have a gorgeous normal map baked out that shows all this wonderful high-res detail. In fact, if you even zoom in here, in some places, even when we're just looking at it in the viewport, you can hardly tell that we're looking at a low-resolution mesh. And so this is the beauty of retopologizing a mesh and then baking out the high-resolution normal map, is we could go ahead and render this, which in fact we will, just real quick here. So let's go ahead and add in a camera. On this camera, I'll just rotate it around. And then take a look at our model. So this actually looks pretty good, so we'll just zoom in right about here. Maybe rotate around the model a little bit. So I just went around hit period to rotate around the cursor. And then I'll rotate down perhaps by double tapping R. Bring in trackball rotation. And then let's go ahead and turn on our environment lighting and ambient occlusion. On the high-res mesh, let's go ahead and turn off the rendering on it so it doesn't render. And then just hit F12 to render this. And you can see it immediately pops up that something is clearly wrong. So let's go ahead and figure out what's going on. Under the material, we've got shadeless enabled, which is not right. And so, on the eyes here, that was enabled. We can turn that off. And actually, I had a setting on. I'm just going to remove that material. On this one, we need to figure out exactly what's going on. It looks like maybe we just need to tone our lamps down. So on these, let's just tone this down to 1. Take these ones down to, say, 0.5. Render that. And that's not quite what it is. Let's double check, see if it's our world settings. So we'll turn these off real quick. There we go. That's what it is. So we turn the environment lighting, and we can see that it's far, far too bright. So we'll just take it down to say 0.25, render that. And then let's go ahead and enable our ambient occlusion again, and we'll set it to multiply. Add in some dark areas in there. Let's go ahead and adjust our world background. We'll just turn on a blend, and let's just see what that looks like initially, which isn't too bad. Let's maybe work with our camera angle a little bit as well. So again, rotating around the cursor, I'm just going to rotate over. Zoom the camera out a bit. Just get something that we like, maybe right in there or so. That starts to look pretty good. Go ahead and zoom in a bit. Let's go ahead and adjust our colors. I'm going to put in a kind of a bluish background, maybe something about like that to render. Brings it out a little bit more. Maybe make this one a bit darker, and then put in actually we're going to sample that one there as the top, and then this one we're going to make much lighter. Something about like that maybe. Maybe get the purple out of here. And there we go. So that's rendering and our full normal map. You notice we get all this beautiful high-res texture detail in there without any trouble whatsoever. Now it'd be very easy to go in, add in a texture or anything else you wanted to do, and really just take it up to the next notch. But you'll notice that I'm rendering in less than 2 seconds here, whereas if I were to go ahead and render the high-resolution one, we'd probably be looking at much higher render times. And in fact, let's just go ahead and test that theory. Let's just disable the rendering on the low, enable the high, make sure that we don't have a material on the high, which we do currently, so we'll just remove that material, and let's just hit F12 and see how long this takes to render in comparison. And I get the feeling it's going to be just a little bit. And there we go, it's done rendering. You can see that the high-res one took 2 minutes, 12.46 seconds, whereas the low-res one took just slightly under 2 seconds. And so, obviously you can tell a little bit of difference between the meshes. If you can render this, this would be much better in terms of the visual appearance. But if you added in a little bit more on this, maybe added in a subsurf modifier, added in a little bit more resolution to the retopologized mesh, or added something like a displacement map, you can immediately see how much time this lower resolution version could save you. And obviously if you mixed in a texture with that, it would go even further. So this is one of the advantages to low resolution meshes, but also using these for real-time games or any other thing where you need very quick rendering times. Retopologizing your high resolution meshes, then baking out a normal map works very, very well.